This video allows us to compare the differences in foreign entry modes. So when we think of foreign entry modes, what is it that we think of? We've got four main ones. They're exporting, licensing, joint ventures, and direct investment. And we're going to look at each of these four in turn. What is it that would favor this particular mode of entry? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages for this particular mode of entry into our internationalization, whether it be trade, again, export, import, or whether it be full direct investment. And so what we're going to see is a continuum there looking at the least risky to the most risky. So that least risky being exporting, that most risky being the direct foreign investment. So what are the conditions that favor export or trade? When we say export, we mean export, import. So what is it that favors that type of trade? It's a limited sales potential in the target country. And when there is little product adaptation required. So the products that we would create in the United States are essentially the same products that are sold or will be sold in the foreign country as far as the product specifications. We don't need to make any changes to those specifications. Also, when the distribution channels are close to the plant, when there are liberal import policies from the host government, and when there is high political risk. So if you're not sure, if you're not sure if you're going to be able to get your money out of the country after you have produced those goods, after you have created your manufacturing facility there, it's better to export because that is the least risky. So that advantage, that first advantage is that exporting minimizes the risk and minimizes the level of investment as well. You can get out of that export-import relationship extremely easily, certainly much more easier than to get out of a full foreign investment. Also, if you can maximize your scale using your additional facilities, therefore you can produce in your own host country in the United States, for example, and therefore we can have a lower per cost unit for our product. What are some of the disadvantages? Well, if you have trade barriers and tariffs, then those add to the cost of the product coming from the United States going into the foreign country. Your transport costs may be high depending upon what it is that you're trying to sell. As well, what is your access to local information? If you are producing and probably selling from the United States, how much true local information about your local customer do you actually have? So that is diminishes the farther away that you are from the customer. As well, your company, there's a potential that your company be viewed as an outsider rather than be viewed as a home country producer. Licensing is the next step up in risk. So export and import has the lowest risk. Licensing has the next lowest risk. And so what are some conditions there that favor licensing? Is when you have import barriers and investment barriers, and therefore you may wish to license your processes there. If the legal protection is possible in that target environment, again, that lends itself to licensing. If legal protection, if the good um, um, intellectual property laws, if those are not strong, then licensing would not be a good idea for you to as a great mode of entry into that foreign country. When you have low sales potential in your target country, again, you may wish to license your processes. If there is a large cultural difference or distance, what does that mean? Is when the two countries are very, very different in cultural ideas, what is accepted in one culture as opposed to another, or what are the types of foods that are eaten in one, or what is the type of dress that is eaten in one, or what is the type of work ethic that is more prevalent in one than the other. Anytime that there is a disconnect there in that cultural difference or distance, it may be better for you to actually license your business practices. And as well, if the licensee, the company that you are licensing to, if they lack the ability to become a competitor. However, that's a very slippery slope there. But what are some of the advantages of licensing? Obviously, it minimizes risk and it minimizes your investment. There is the speed of entry is it's very quick. It's very easy to license your processes and allow someone in that target country to produce your product based upon your tried and true business practices. It does help you to get around the trade barriers. So therefore, it is actually someone in that host country, in that target country, that is actually producing these goods. And as well, a high return on investment, because you already have that understanding, you have that know-how. And so you are basically renting out that know-how to someone else. What are some disadvantages there for licensing? It's you have lost some of your control over the products that are being sold in that foreign country. As well, what is a possible fear? What is a possible disadvantage where that licensee may become a competitor? So as part of favoring licensing, when that licensee could not become a competitor, again, depending upon how well that licensee does with your particular product, perhaps that licensee could become a competitor. And as well, when we talk about knowledge and we talk about the license period, are you giving away the farm, so to speak, just to get your product quickly into another country, but you've lost those rights? You're still getting the money as long as the licensee is paying. But if you have a short license period, if the knowledge from your product or service is expelled, if you want to call it, if that knowledge is taken over by the licensee and then shortens that period, or if that licensee becomes your competitor because you have lost control there, those are disadvantages. When we look at joint ventures, what are some factors that would encourage joint ventures? Is when you have import barriers. So joint venture being what? You now have a joint venture between the US firm and the target country firm. So that helps you to get around import barriers. When there is that large cultural difference, it is the foreign or foreign joint venture, that foreign partner there that understands those cultural differences, that understands those cultural needs, demands, and is able to navigate that particular path for you. As well, if the assets cannot be fairly priced, or if you do have a high sales potential, you do have some risk. Again, from a political standpoint, that having that joint venture, you having perhaps a 49% stake, and the target company in the target country has a 51% stake, then that will definitely help with the political risk and the government restrictions for foreign ownership. So a lot of time, especially if it is a mining company, for example, I worked with mining companies in Guatemala, for example, and so that was a tremendous gain for Guatemala, is that they were the ones who owned 51%, and that the US and Canadian company, actually the parent company was Canadian, owned only the 49%. As well, when your local company can do what? Provide those skills, resources, distribution network, that brand name for you. So that local company being home, being your target company in your target country, that target company can provide those local resources and skills for you. So what are some advantages? It overcomes that ownership restriction and cultural difference. Obviously, it allows you to combine the resources of the two companies to be able to have a greater or an improved playing field, because now both the companies are working together in that joint venture. As well, there is that potential for you to learn not only about the other country, to learn about the consumers, what their demands are, but you may possibly as well learn about other management techniques with regard to that particular product or service that is being sold, manufactured in a different country, in perhaps a different way, or looking at other demand reasons why you may, why your customers, what other thoughts, what other demands or needs your product may fill. So you may learn from that. As well, from a political standpoint, again, you can be viewed as an insider, as also as well, that if you are a joint venture, then you're not forking out 100%. You are basically having, hopefully you're having 50-50 or close to 50-50. If there is a political, you again having the 49% stake, and the host company, host government or host country having 51% stake. But maybe there is no problem with the politics there, but your investment is still, maybe it's an 80-20. So your investment, again, still is not the 100%. What are some disadvantages? Managing a foreign workforce, managing a relationship. Managing relationships is a skill, but managing a foreign relationship is a step above in that skill. So there may be some issues there with managing that relationship as well. You will have lost certain control there, because it is the other company, especially if they have 51% stake, they have truly the upper hand. So there can be some issues there. As well, we are moving down that continuum. There is greater risk than just exporting and licensing. Why is that? Because there's more investment, and it is a much more leading toward a more permanent solution, as they say. And so it's harder to extricate yourself. There may as well be some loss of knowledge, and there's a possibility similar to the licensee that the partner could become your competitor. When we look at direct investment, which is the greatest amount of risk in these four foreign entry modes, what are some items that would lend themselves to foreign direct investment? It's when you have very high import barriers. So those import barriers could be taxes, those import barriers could be transport charges. So high import barriers allow or make it more attractive to have foreign direct investment, and therefore you do not have to import because you're actually producing in-house, in company. When there is a small cultural distance, so that is as well, that small cultural distance from a management perspective, but you can think of another item that is from a larger cultural distance when it comes to what are the demands, what are the needs, what are the wants of your consumer. Therefore, it is easier, you're closer to your consumer, you're able to pivot, you are able to make changes in the product or service so that it will appeal. So that cultural distance works both ways. It works, there are certain items that the farther away you are, the more different you are, appeals to direct investment, but as well, sometimes the smaller differences there depending upon that management style, for example. So also, if your assets cannot be fairly priced or you've got a very high sales potential. When I worked in the Congo, I worked in Democratic Republic of Congo for 5 months, and there was a huge contingent of internationals, specifically Australians, some South Africans, Americans, obviously me, but as well, the company that I was working for was actually an Australian company and Australian software. But what happened was they were mining copper. And so the copper there, the percentage of copper was 6%, whereas the percentage of copper in the US to make it viable was 0.6%. So this was a factor of 10 greater. So that high sales potential, there were not enough places to stay. There were not enough things that having to get food, bring the type of food in, or prepare the type of food, or to have the potable water that was sterilized water as well. So that high sales potential lends itself to foreign direct investment, and also if you have low political risk. Now, as well, that is also, if you have higher political risk, you can still have foreign direct investment, but again, you may have, you may not be the sole owner, that perhaps you own 49% of that. So what are some advantages there? You have a greater knowledge of the local market. Once you are in place, you can better apply those specialized skills of that marketplace, of that workforce there to make those changes. If that workforce does have specialized skills, you can minimize your loss of knowledge from the joint venture or from that licensee. And as well, you can be viewed as the insider. Again, mining companies specifically do help to improve the economies of the places that of the countries that they're in, based upon the food, based upon the hotels, based upon the road system, based upon the medical system, based upon jobs, giving good salaries to the people who are in that area. What are some disadvantages? This is foreign direct investment is the highest amount of risk from export, which is the lowest amount of risk, then licensing, then joint ventures, and then foreign direct investment, which is the highest risk. It also requires more resources and commitment on your part, on our part, the part of our company in the US. And it may be difficult to manage local resources. Again, if the perceptions, the ideas are that much more different. And then finally, when we look at the comparison between global players and domestic players, we see that it is the global players that actually beat the domestic players. Why is that so? Generally, why is that so? Is that those global players can take advantage of economies of scale in their product development, in their manufacturing, in their marketing. And so therefore, their per unit costs can be much lower. As well, arbitrage. So it's the ability to exploit differences in each company and each country's comparative advantage via that fragmentation of the value chain, that international fragmentation, so that you're producing a part in the US, you're producing another part in Germany, you might be producing another part in Sweden, for example, and then you are assembling in China. So similar to what Apple does for the iPhone. As well, that knowledge transfer, so the ability to develop, coordinate, and transfer knowledge across borders in between the different subsidiaries of the countries. And so you're able to take advantage of that other management expertise, perhaps that innovation in the particular product due to those higher demands of the foreign consumer. Perhaps they are demands that you did not think of, needs that you did not think of, or that foreign consumer is very specific and requires a constant increase in the value, in the attributes of your product and service. So that ability to achieve new knowledge and innovation by bringing in different groups to discuss, to experiment, to look at your particular product or service. And then finally, that cross subsidization. What does it do? It allows you to take the cash, the profits that you have made in one country, to use those to expand and exploit the market in the second country, and even allows for, we do have the word predatory pricing here in that second country, in that allows you to basically sell the product or service for less than what it costs to produce that product or service. Why might you do that? To edge out a competitor, so that the competitor would not be able to lower his or her prices to such a degree to compete with you. And the only way to do that for any length of time is, again, to have that cross subsidization. However, even though there are direct measurable advantages for multinational companies, there are also direct difficulties of those multinational companies. What are some of those? One is managing the stakeholder interests versus shareholder interests. So shareholders are whom? Shareholders are the ones who actually own shares, own stock in the company, if it is a publicly traded company. The stakeholder, however, is different. The stakeholder may or may not own shares, and probably does not own shares. However, that stakeholder can be whom? Can be the hotel owner, can be the restaurant, can be the taxi driver, can be the store owner, can be the hospital, can be the school, can be the host government. So all of these things come into play, and especially the lower the level of, if you want to call it, economic sophistication, the higher the risk for managing a stakeholder, because it is the stakeholder, again, who are those ancillary individuals that will make a difference, and especially if there is some issue. One of the things, again, when I was in Guatemala, there were people that were kidnapped. There was, unfortunately, there was a guard, a security guard that was killed at the mine, and it was because the stakeholders were not managed correctly, that there were differences in the way certain stakeholders, landowners, were treated, that other landowners were not treated, or differences in what had been common practice of allowing people to come in and pick up different pieces of ore, spillover ore, and then that practice changed. And so that actually was in the Congo as far as the spillover ore, but there were problems in Guatemala at one time due to the differences in payments when the company is buying out different people's land, for example. And so they bought out most of the land at one particular price, and then they paid a much higher price to a few of the landowners who were holding out. And so then what happens, the other people that have sold their land at a lower price, even though that was the price that was offered, they were very happy to get it, found out about it, and then there were rioting and problems, where what would have been better for the company is that after they had paid a premium for certain landowners, the remaining landholders' land, it would have been better for the company to go back to those other landholders that had sold earlier and giving them that delta, because it did shut the mine down for 3 or 4 days. Again, there was a security guard that was killed. There was somebody that was kidnapped that was almost killed. And so stakeholder interests are extremely important. And so being able to manage those stakeholder interests takes a different thought process, takes a different view. It's not just economics. It's not just what is my cost, what are my expenses, and that's my profit, and that's what I need. So it's a completely different mindset. Also looking at how do you manage that fragmented value chain where you're producing in 3 or 4 different countries and then you are assembling in another country? So understanding those distribution channels, understanding the links in that chain takes a different type of management skill. Being able to manage the government. So our government and international other governments, thinking of what are the regulations, what are the rules, what are the tax implications, being able to navigate that takes a certain skill, as well as looking at efficiencies based, they call it CAGE. And so CAGE meaning the differences. What are those differences? Cultural difference being the C, administrative and political difference being the A, geographical distance, how far away is it being the G, and then the economics being the E. So these are other extremely important items that require a different mindset to manage, to envision, and then to manage. It's completely different from a tactical business, again, setting. where you're concerned with what are your input costs, how much are you going to charge, and therefore what is your profit. So multinational corporations do certainly have difficulties that local companies, local within US, I mean, do not have.